Here in Ottawa, political battle lines over gender identity are being drawn in the wake of Alberta's proposed changes to transgender policies. After being asked for reaction for days, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre finally sided with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, saying he's against puberty blockers for those under the age of 18.
Just to be clear, you said yes, only adults should take puberty blockers?
I think we should protect children. Let them make adult decisions when they become adults.
So you do support age restrictions? You are against puberty blockers for kids under the age of 18. Is that
yes.
clear?
Poilievre also accused Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of using the provincial policy as a wedge issue to distract from his own economic record. As for the Prime Minister, he had this to say in response to Poilievre.
What Mr. Poilievre and Ms. Smith are proposing is to take away the rights of parents and their kids to make the right choices for them with their doctors. We don't think government should be doing that. Our government will always stand up for the most vulnerable, including our trans youth.
The Scrum is here to unpack what you just heard. Robert Fife is the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail. Stephanie Levitz is the Deputy Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star. And Sabrina Nanji is a reporter with the Queen's Park Observer. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. Steph, I'll start with you because you were in that Scrum with Mr. Poilievre this week. What is your take on how it unfolded? It had been I think the third day he was asked where he stood on the issues that Danielle Smith had brought to the fore. And he finally came out with a yes or no on at least one part of it.
Yeah, and in part that was because the reporters, in the gaggle there just weren't letting it go. It was question upon question upon question, and it could be that in that particular instance, Mr. Poilievre took a lesson from his predecessor, Andrew Scheer. If you'll recall in the 2019 election, Andrew Scheer was asked nearly every single day on the road for the better part of a week what his position was on abortion, and he never answered the question. The questions, therefore, never stopped coming. So in this instance, Mr. Poilievre finally presented an answer to that question, and what happened in the subsequent day was interesting. He was doing a press conference out in Vancouver. He was asked a version of the question again, and all he said was, "I've already answered that." In a way, trying to sort of provide an answer and then stop the conversation.
And there was even a further evolution that I noted because kind of slipped into an answer, Bob, he gave on another issue. He said, we are the only party standing up for parental rights. What advantage do you think the Conservatives see in taking that position?
Well, there is a lot of consternation amongst parents about this issue. It's a very, very complex, very personal issue. But, I think politicians have to be very careful about this. These are issues that, we don't want to be dragged into a U.S.-style cultural war over these kind of issues. And the one thing that strikes me about all of this is, let's remember Mr. Poilievre and a lot of these Conservatives, during the COVID was going on, that they were all saying to the truckers and people who did not want to have COVID shots, it's your body, you shouldn't have the state having any involvement in what you put into your body. These are children or teenagers rather, and everybody matures at a different age. It's their decision to make with their doctors and with their families, and I really think we need to keep the politicians out of this.
It's interesting that Bob puts it that way, Sabrina, because really virtually, I would say no politician, except for one all week, actually took that view. They all jumped in kind of and felt, and I'm not going to judge their reasons, but certainly felt like they wanted to say something about the issue one way or the other, or were asked about it. The only politician that really seemed to want to stay out of it is actually Doug Ford, who was asked a few times, and his ministers throughout the week, are you going to follow suit? And he was like, no, not for us, moving on.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because Doug Ford has just completely nipped this in the bud. The Premier's office went out of its way to distance themselves from Danielle Smith because I guess coincidentally he had a meeting with her, a working breakfast as they put it, and Ford's office in the media advisory went out of its way to essentially say that this has nothing to do with, Danielle Smith's recent trans policies. We want to talk about, things that matter to Ontarians, that are top of mind for most people in the province, which is things like cost of living, the carbon tax and their fight against it, and so on. And so I think that, Doug Ford doesn't really have the same politics at play in Ontario as Danielle Smith is dealing with. So definitely he's steering clear of this one.
What's also interesting, though, to me, Steph, is though the politics of it are different, let's say, for Doug Ford and Danielle Smith, they may not be as different for Pierre Poilievre and Doug Ford, because many of the voters that Doug Ford is trying to attract or is trying to address with his stance are voters that Pierre Poilievre, for example, let's say in the GTA or within Toronto even to a certain degree, or different urban places in the country, like those could be part of a voting coalition that ultimately the Conservatives might need to go beyond what they have produced in the past 2 elections.
The thing that is always a tension, I think, for a federal Conservative politician that's different at the provincial level, right, is a lot of the messaging that a federal Conservative leader has to put out has to appeal to constituencies across the board. And I think with Mr. Poilievre, you know, he started off answering some of these questions about Danielle Smith's policies, as he did with Blaine Higgs when it was coming out of New Brunswick, as he did with Scott Moe in Saskatchewan. This is a provincial matter. This is a provincial matter. The question becomes for these leaders always is, what is your personal position? Because we'd like to know your personal position, because that gives voters the question, well, would you legislate? And that's an area we haven't plumbed yet so far with Mr. Poilievre, is what would he do legislatively to deal with this? In a way, it's the same question for the Trudeau Liberals. Would they take action against Danielle Smith, as they've done with Premier Higgs in New Brunswick, over abortion? They have clawed back health funding. So will the Liberals put any heft behind their argument that this is, you know, terrible policy? They have some levers they could pull too.
And they have not yet provided any specifics, because we've asked them a number of times too, Bob.
Look, I don't think they want to get into it, because it is an issue that could divide Canadians. I mean, a lot of parents are legitimately concerned about these kind of issues, and I think it is a very volatile. It could be a very volatile political issue in a campaign, and so I don't think they really want to get into it that much themselves. As for Mr. Poilievre, to be fair to him, he's tried to focus largely on the economy. This week has been on car theft, and on Friday he was talking about immigrant communities, or particularly in the Punjabi communities, who are facing extortion from gangs. He's been trying to focus on issues that matter to Canadians, but he gets these kind of questions, and frankly, he should have pulled a Doug Ford, but instead he pulled a Danielle Smith. And that the thing is, we don't want to be dragged into these U.S. cultural wars. Look how it's tearing America apart. Do we really want to have that in this country? We have to be careful about that.
I'll leave it there. Thank you so much to the Scrum today, Sabrina Nanji, Steph Levitz, and Bob Fife.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.